Mr. Stevens, I want to look next with you at the response from the Minister, HSOC 0005411. It's a letter dated the 28th of July 2006. You've made reference to it already in your evidence, but we can see, for the sake of completeness, the full letter here. She says in the third paragraph, I am satisfied that an increase of £400,000, approximately 11% to the Trust's funding, will maintain an appropriate level of support to their remaining registrants and is within the current level of government funding that is available. So that was the response that the Trust received to its business case.
Sorry,
that was the response which the Trust received from the Minister to the
yes.
business case which had been presented.
Yes, yeah. I just noticed the last sentence of that paragraph. Both these figures include provision for administration costs, which until then had been funded separately.
Can I just stop you there, because I think we've lost a bit of the sound. Can I just have that checked by the IT, please? Do you want to start again?
The final sentence of that paragraph. Both these figures include provision for administration costs. Before then, the figures administration costs had been funded separately. So it wasn't this increase of 11%, so-called, is just totally spurious.
Mr. Stevens, we're having some difficulty hearing you. We can hear you, but it's not as audible as it was before the break. Are you able to move perhaps a little closer to the microphone?
Try that.
Still not as how it was prior to the break.
No, it's something's happened over the break. I'm afraid.
Has it been okay until now?
Yes.
Because I haven't touched anything during the break.
No, well, something's happened somewhere in the system. I'm sorry. Shall we just take a few minutes and see if we can get it sorted? Because the people who are watching remotely have got to be able to hear, and if we're having difficulty, they will too, I think. So my very great apologies to you. I'm sorry for this, but we'll just take a break for 5 minutes and see if we can get it sorted.
Thank you, sir.
You can hear us all right?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
I think the problem, I'm told, was with some form of amplifier here, which was affecting a section of the inquiry hearing room. So it hasn't affected everyone who's listening online, I'm pleased to say. And if the sound drops, Ms. Richards and I will put up with it. If she has to ask you to repeat something, I hope you'll forgive her.
Of course.
That was the letter of response. I want to look then at how the Trust responded to this. If we go to HSOC 305412_002. We look at the first half of the page. This is a document authored by you on the 11th of August 2006, setting out, as I understand it, your thoughts on the Minister's response. If we go to the third page, we can see from the top of the page, you described the amount offered as very disappointing. You refer to thinking that there may be a device to enlarge the offer without breaching some internal DOH rules, and to a £1,000 goodwill element as being risible. And then if we look further down the page under the heading Nature of the Response to the Business Case, you say the business case was well researched based on the facts of our registrant's circumstances, endorsed by the trustees of both trusts. The Minister's expressed satisfaction with her offer appears to reject the considered judgment of trustees. And then if we go over the next page, under the heading Evaluating the Offer, if we look at the bottom half of the page, we can see 3 paragraphs in the bottom. It should be borne in mind that the MFT has just come to the end of a 3-year funding arrangement consisting of £3 million annually, setting aside the department's failure to pay additional £50,000 promised for the final year of that arrangement. One of the registrant's main complaints has been the lack of recognition of the rising annual cost of living. The offer does nothing to help either trust increase support to take account of this. In fact, an 11% increase on trust expenditure would only provide an amount approximately equal in real terms to MFT's £3 million received in the first year of that arrangement. And then, final page, you say, the lack of recognition in the offer of the trust's needs as set out in the business case is immensely frustrating. It is as if there's been no business case submitted and the department had announced a new funding arrangement without any reference to the trustees or to their considered assessment of the registrant's needs. You refer to the nature of their calculations seeming to indicate a weakness and to arithmetic errors. And then penultimate paragraph, on balance, the department's response to the business case appears wholly unacceptable. It's not immediately clear how we might develop any option but to accept it. But at the moment, it would appear that a response to the Minister objecting to the offer is justified. Now, I don't think we have, Mr. Stevens, a copy of your letter in response to the Minister. Is it your recollection that you did write back to the Minister making these points?
This is not my recollection, but that's not to say it didn't happen. I just don't remember it.
So the view that you've set out in this document suggests frustration and disappointment, to say the least, on the part of the trustees or on your part, that the department had responded in this way to the business case. Is that right? And if we look then at how the trustees decided to proceed, it's MACF 5020_102. So these are the minutes of a meeting on the 21st of August 2006. And we can see from the bottom of that page that it's a consideration of the Minister's response. If we go over the page, it says there, fourth line down, there followed a wide-ranging debate. The following points are salient. I'm not going to go through each of the points. We can all read the minutes. But if we go to the next page, halfway down, bottom half of the page, says this: the chairman asks members of the board to adopt the following proposal, that after debating the response to the Minister's letter, the invitation to attend a further meeting with officials should be accepted to re-express the key points in the business case and how they affect the community of care, that the letter from the Minister does not address the views of trustees, and that they are minded to resign, and that there is a will to discuss with officials what sum of money there is that accords with the business case, where that might be found and from where. And then an amendment was put to strike out reference to resignation and to only accept the invitation to attend a further meeting and to seek at least a 3-year continuation of funding at the level finally agreed. The amendment was accepted and carried. So it would appear from this that you put forward a proposal which included the trustees being minded to resign, but that was rejected by trustees. Is that your recollection?
Yes.
And what was it that led you to think that a threat to resign was now the right response?
I just felt we were running out of options.
That having been rejected by the board as a whole, it would appear that the response came down to wanting a further meeting to re-express key points in the business case. Is that right?
Yes.
Was a further meeting with the ministers secured, as far as you can recall?
There was a further meeting with the minister.
Was there a further meeting with ministers during the time that you were chair?
I don't recall a further meeting with Caroline Flint. They probably changed the minister and we probably had another one. I can't remember who the next one was. I mean, there was a string of them, and very few of them lasted for very long. I don't think it was anything to do with us.
If that was August of 2006, and amongst other things, the Trust issued a statement to registrants updating them on the position and suggesting that a meeting would be sought. If we go, please, to DHSC 00411155 _123, please. This is now a few months later, 1st of December 2006. It would appear from the third paragraph that there's been at least a further meeting with officials. And then in the fourth paragraph, fourth line, it says, I feel I must ask you to arrange for us to have another opportunity to present our arguments at ministerial level again. If you and we can achieve this together soon, and ideally before programme budgets become too set in stone, I'm hopeful we can demonstrate that it's wrong that our beneficiaries, whose lives are continuing and will continue to be so blighted by errors within the NHS, should be further disadvantaged by financial stringency within the NHS. So is it right to understand that you'd managed to secure a further meeting with officials, and I think probably one of your last acts as outgoing chair was to ask for a further ministerial meeting, but there was no such meeting during your chairmanship?
Correct. I can't remember who Elizabeth Woodison was, actually. I can't remember where how we got her name. I think maybe she was Stopes Row's boss.
Now, just looking at without going back to the documents, at the sequence of events that we've explored over the course of the afternoon, would you accept that the Trust took too long to put together a business case to government for further funding?
No.
Why?
Because we had many things to do. We could have put a business case together, or we could have got the Skipton fund going. Doing both at the same time was, I think, beyond the possibility.
Leaving aside the difficulties of resourcing to which you've referred and the competing demands of the establishment of the Skipton Fund, if you'd had greater resources, do you accept it would have been appropriate to put together a business case rather earlier than we see from the chronology?
It might have been possible. Whether we would have got a reception, any better reception, because the same people in Richmond House were dealing with both issues as well. So I think running both projects simultaneously, both from our point of view and from the Department of Health's point of view, would have been difficult.
Do you think it was a mistake to pursue the low-key strategy of trying to persuade through the presentation of a business case and meeting with ministers, rather than a more overt or campaigning or robust approach?
Personally, I don't, but maybe that just reflects my personality. As we said right at the beginning, Farnham Trust, and McLaren by this stage was dealing with, what, 400 people? To get media interest, to be able to mount an effective media campaign, I think was pie in the sky. We never achieved anything. Without that, I'm not sure that we could do very much more than argue a well-presented business case and deal with it as we did.
You had amongst the beneficiary community individuals living in desperate circumstances, as your own long-term review had clearly acknowledged. You had children who'd been orphaned, you had widows in poverty, you had haemophiliacs living with HIV in a desperately ill and impoverished state. Do you really not think that some media organisations might have been interested if the Trust had made contact with them and asked them to support a campaign?
Such limited experience as I've had with the media would suggest that they would immediately go the other way and start picking holes in the fact that the Trust was dealing with a very small number of people, had an immense amount of money. I mean, bear in mind at this stage, the outgoings to this community were probably in excess of £200 million. Because by the time we got to 2006, Skipton had been running quite hard. So there's a huge amount of money had gone to a very, very small community. Admittedly, had been damaged by the National Health Service. But I think it would have been very difficult to have a reliable and consistent media campaign. I fully accept I might be wrong, but you make a case. Other people have made a case. The trustees chose to do something different.
And is this correct as a matter of fact that the trustees did not make any attempt to contact media organisations to see what their response might be?
Correct.
Now, moving on from attempts to secure funding from government, I wanted to ask you a little more about the Trust's relationship with its beneficiaries. What steps were taken by the Trust to try and ensure transparency and fairness in its decision-making?
We did what we could. I can't think of specific steps. We simply tried our utmost to be objective and to be fair, and to have fairness actually quite high on the agenda, which might not always have been acceptable to the beneficiaries concerned. I mean, there was always a danger, which we were aware of people with loud voices getting more, which we tried to resist. We had user trustees on the board, I think for most of the time, I think probably for all the time that I was chairman, who were able to, or should have been able to, ensure that there was balance and fairness in the decision making. If they didn't do that, then there's not much I can do about it.
If we look back at the 1999 strategic review, Shomik, which was MACF 5045_019. And if we go to, try page 24 of the electronic pagination, Shomik. That's it. So this is a recommendation to the trust, as opposed to an external recommendation to government, which we looked at earlier. We just looked down these series of recommendations, bottom half of the page, to Little Roman 7, to improve explanations to registrants and set out clear grant-giving policies. Now, that might suggest that as at January 1999, it had been identified that improvements were required, both in terms of the explanations given to registrants and in terms of the policies that were available to registrants. Other than through the publication of the Macfarlane Trust Handbook, how else did the Trust ensure that its grant-giving policies were known to and understood by registrants?
As the handbook, you've already made more than one reference to newsletters. There was a website. So I think the explanations were there on what the policies were. As far as explanations to individual registrants about particular grant requests, which maybe is the first part of that sentence can embraces, all we could do was just to try to make sure that the explanations were clear, full, and emphasize the considerations that that were in the minds of the trustees or the staff when decisions were made about grant requests.
I want to invite you to look at some observations made in the witness statement of Jude Cohen, from whom the inquiry will be hearing in a couple of weeks. Shomik, it's WITN 4565001. If we could go, so Jude Cohen was head of support services for the Macfarlane Trust for a period of time. If we go to page 16, please. Paragraph 54. The statement there refers to the NSSC, which was the committee that by this time was the committee responsible for considering grant applications. And says this, it seemed to me that the committee's decisions were often inconsistent and made on an ad hoc basis. When I questioned this ad hoc approach to grant making, I was informed by the chair, Peter Stevens, that as charity trustees, they were expected to make ad hoc and discretionary payments and not have a blanket approach to similar applications. Can you recall a concern being raised with you about decisions being made on an inconsistent and ad hoc basis?
Sorry, what was the question?
Can you recall concerns being expressed to you by Jude Cohen or indeed by others?
I can't recall that. I'm sure what she's saying there is correct, but I don't recall it.
Was what's recorded here, even if you can't remember the conversation, was this a correct reflection of your approach, that the trustees' approach should be ad hoc and discretionary rather than having a blanket approach to similar applications?
Yeah, I think that's right. We have to consider the individual circumstances each time.
Would you accept that if similar cases are not being treated in a similar way, that might give rise to an appearance of unfairness and inconsistency?
It might look that way, but again, if we applied that to every grant request, if we looked at the circumstances of the person making the request on every occasion, then we were being fair.
If we could go on to page 18, please, Shomek. We look at the bottom paragraph, paragraph 63. She refers there to a decision of the NSSC that grants not backed by receipts would be treated as loans, which would then have an impact on registrants. And over the page, paragraph 64, she records her view that that policy should have been made clear to registrants from the outset, but that was rejected by the partnership group, which decided that registrants should only be informed in a follow-up letter. Do you have any recollection of this issue?
No, but I would say that the partnership group were probably wrong there, that people should know right from the outset that receipts were necessary. If one didn't do that right at the beginning, then they would be upset when they had to go back and try and get hold of a receipt. So I think I'm in agreement with Jude there when she finishes that paragraph saying, I consider this inappropriate because by the time a registrant received a follow-up letter, it may have been too late to request a receipt. I think she's absolutely right.
And if we look further down the page at paragraphs 66 and 67, she expresses a concern about a lack of guidelines and publication of guidelines. And I think you may be aware that the office guidelines, which set out maximum amounts that would be paid for certain items, were not, or had not at this stage, I think, been published to beneficiaries. Why was that? Why not ensure that they were aware of the office guidelines?
I think we were damned if we did, we were damned if we didn't on this occasion. When we did publish guidelines, they became shopping lists. When we didn't, we get the criticism that they were opaque and lacking in clarity.
Why would publication?
If we had had guidelines that didn't leave the office, then Jude's complaint could not have been made, and we would have avoided the shopping list danger. As it is, guidelines got out very, very quickly, and so we so to avoid the shopping list, we had to avoid having guidelines published.
Why did you think that the publication of guidelines would result in a shopping list, by which I assume you mean applications being made, that were unmeritorious?
That's what happened. We're dealing with people.
Wouldn't
so if one sees that the trust had a guideline for a particular form of mattress, up to a certain maximum amount of money, instantly there would be a lot of requests for that sort of mattress, spending that much money. Why not? It seemed to be a perfectly reasonable reaction to having that list of those guidelines.
The consequence of the failure to publish guidelines might be, however, that people weren't making applications for things that they genuinely needed or might genuinely enhance their lives.
Possibly, if we had been cleverer, maybe, and had published guidelines without a number by them, without a figure, maybe that would have helped. But then, of course, we would have been damned for lack of clarity. I don't think there's a single answer, a single solution that satisfies all possible criticism.
You see, the problem with not publishing the guidelines with figures might be that those who are already struggling to manage their day-to-day lives might obtain their 3 quotes for a washing machine that was over £300 in vain, because the trust operated an internal policy of only paying up to £250, whereas if they knew what the trust's policy was, they could make attempts to ensure that their applications were within the policy. What would be wrong with that?
Yes, possibly.
Why did
I think you could specify a hypothesis, whatever line we took, you can dream up an example that would show that it was inappropriate. So I would say we're damned if we do, damned if we don't.
Why did the trust require applicants to obtain several quotes for work or items when a grant application was being made?
Why did
you require there to be more than 1 quote? I think we've heard evidence that often 3 quotes were required.
So that we could be certain that we weren't being used as the first source of funds, but as the last resort, which is a consequence of the way we were set up.
Did you and your fellow trustees consider, however, the difficulties that might create for people already in very poor health, struggling to manage day to day?
Of course we did.
But that was regarded as...
And that's one of the reasons, one of the things that user trustees were very good at was explaining this problem.
Did the trust take any steps to amend its practice in light of that explanation?
Did the trust what?
Take any steps to amend the practice of requiring 3 quotes for all items or pieces of work?
I think we probably looked at every conceivable option of how grant applications should be made, how many bids there should be, whether there should be guidelines. I mean, I fully appreciate you have a devil's advocate role. I was a trustee of that trust for many years. I think I was totally aware of the difficulties under which our beneficiaries were living, and of the difficulty that we were facing of meeting their requirements with totally insufficient funds. So we had to make the process work in such a way that people did not come direct to us as the first source of money, but only after they had tried the social fund and anywhere else that might be able to help them.
Was the process made deliberately bureaucratic to deter applications being made?
No.
Were there...
The process was designed to make sure that we didn't... I'm not sure, I'm trying to find the right word. But we didn't spend money on some applications that would have been better spent on others. So we had to make sure that our resources were managed sensibly, were husbanded carefully.
Was practical support offered to registrants to assist them in making their applications to the trust?
They could speak to members of staff who each charity had a particular named member of staff who would help them talk them through the process.
In terms of the information that the trust required from its registrants on a regular basis, is it right that there was a system of requiring census forms to be completed?
Yes, there was I believe it was annual. There was certainly a census form, so that we knew we had a handle on income and expenditure, household income and expenditure.
And that the figure that was then used as household figure for the purpose of, as it were, any means testing of applications would include, would it not, the income of a spouse or partner or adult children?
Yes. You refer to means testing. We used the benefits of flowing into a household as a proxy for means testing. So people who were receiving income support, for example, or mobility allowance or whatever, I can't remember what they were called now. So we knew what that meant in terms of their household income and their expenditure.
Some Macfarlane Trust registrants have described to the inquiry that the process they had to go through, form filling, multiple quotes, providing details of on a regular basis of household income, made them feel that they were holding out a begging bowl. Do you understand why they might have felt that way?
Of course.
Was that unhappiness ever explicitly recognised and addressed by trustees?
It was certainly recognised. We did our best to address it by ensuring there was sufficient information, ensuring that the staff in the office were sympathetic and helpful, by talking to beneficiaries when we could through the partnership group and at weekend events as long as they went on. So, yeah, we did what we could. It's quite significant that Eileen Trust didn't have any of these problems because the Eileen Trust was small and we had a caseworker, Susan Daniels, who knew everybody. They knew her. They could get in touch with her, and that was something that, if it had been possible to implement that process in Macfarlane Trust, we would have avoided a lot of the problems. But we couldn't because there were too many people.
Now, is it right that in terms of Macfarlane Trust decision-making, there was no formal appeal process in the way that we'll explore with the Skipton Fund tomorrow? There was a specific appeal process. If a registrant wished to appeal against a refusal of an application for assistance, they would that would fall to be considered by you as chair or by you in coordination with your fellow trustees. Is that correct?
I think it was the latter. I think it was done by the board, including myself. Yeah.
And your statement suggests that for an appeal to succeed, there would either have to be new evidence or...
That applied to Caxton, I think not. I don't think that was an NFT requirement.
So, was there any policy or any published criteria as to how an appeal might proceed within the Macfarlane Trust?
Was there
any policy or any published criteria for an appeal within the Macfarlane Trust?
Not that I can recall.
ask you to look at a couple of letters. The first is dated from when you were not a trustee in the mid-90s, and the second is when you were a trustee. Shomik, could we have, please, BHCT 40875? Do you have that? BHCT 408, oh, it might be 873, sorry. Inability to read my own handwriting. So this is a letter 3rd of June 1996, so this is from when you were not trustee. It's in that period after your first period of trusteeship. But if we can see, it's a letter from the Macfarlane Trust. This is a letter to Dr. Main. It's asking for a medical report in support of an application the patient has made for assistance. And if we look at the 4th paragraph, it says this: all information contained in the completed report will be treated as given in confidence to the trust and will not be shared with the patient concerned. And then there's reference to, in the final paragraph, to a consent form, which I don't think we've been able to find. If we can then go to a document that dates from your time as trustee, TREL 40316_064. We can see this is October 2002, so this is during your chairmanship. Again, it's a request to a doctor for a report, and the 3rd paragraph tells us all information on the completed report will be treated in complete confidence and will not be shared with the patient concerned. Now, the purpose of showing you both those letters is to show that it appears this is a practice that continued for a number of years. Why was it that the information being sought from the doctor would not be shared with the patient?
There might be information that the clinician would give the trust that hadn't been shared with the patient.
Wasn't it the patient's right to know what their clinician was saying to the trust in relation to their application?
It's not our job to tell them.
But it's your policy, as in the trust's policy, it would appear that the information will not be shared with the patient.
That's correct. As long as the clinician knows that, then it's up to the clinician to decide whether or not to share, to tell the patient what he or she is telling us. It's not for us to pass on the information from the doctor to the doctor's patient.
Why did the trust think it proper to receive information about a patient, medical information about a patient that they wouldn't share with the patient?
We are not in control of the information that the doctor is going to give us. So all we can do is just assure the doctor that whatever he or she says, we will not share it with the patient. It's up to the doctor concerned to decide whether or not to do that. What's the problem?
The information's being provided, information that's about the individual and their medical condition, that they're not permitted to see, that might lead to their application being rejected, and they've no way of dealing with that.
Well, then they'll talk to the doctor. If we say it's been declined on medical grounds, they can talk to the doctor because they will know that we obtained the medical information from their doctor. We cannot possibly start giving information out to patients that the doctor tells us that might not have told the patient. I simply don't see the problem.
Well, I asked you the question and you've given your answer. Can I ask you to look at MACF 5011_072, please? This is a document authored by you in July of 2002, and it's proposals for the revision of the structure of grant payments. If we go to the second page, top half of the page, you're referring first of all here to the system of reg pay, so regular pay, and you've identified it as complex, 15 different rates applicable. Complexity uses up office time and encourages inaccuracy. Lowest band gives no incentive for people to be employed, nor does it recognise additional financial needs arising from families. And then your fourth point, reliance on state benefits as the indicator of need, has the advantages of being objective and for the trust economical, but also some disadvantages. Benefits might not be applied for. There is inconsistency in their application. They give only a crude measure of need and so on. This is July of 2002. First of all, given that you've identified a complex, potentially inconsistent process that may only give a crude measure of need, why was that being identified for the first time in the middle of 2002?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, maybe I should have identified it earlier. Maybe it had been identified earlier and nothing had been done about it. I don't know.
And do you know whether steps...
I'd only been chairman a year and a half. So, or no, if that, a year and a quarter. So I possibly didn't come up to speed as fast as you might have done. But I come up with something here.
Do you know whether changes were made to the reg pay system in response to the concerns that you were expressing?
Sorry, I didn't...
Do you know whether changes were made to the reg pay system in response to the concerns you were expressing?
I don't know. I can't remember whether you had to go on through the paper to find out what I was proposing. I might remember then, but I can't remember if this did lead to any changes.
So I haven't quite finished the McFarlane Trust yet, but I note the time in yours and Mr. Stevens' hands as to whether we continue or pick up in the morning.
Yes, well, I think it's probably a good time for a break. My apologies once again, Mr. Stevens, for not having been able to start as promptly as we would have wished with decent sound after the last break. But I hope that problem doesn't. I hope that problem doesn't recur. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, if you please, and of course the usual rules apply overnight. But look forward to seeing you then at 10 o'clock tomorrow. 10 o'clock.
I should look forward.